Well, everyone, I gave you a nice little introduction to myself, but I was muted the whole time. So I thought I would share with you that the music I just played is part of a larger goal for this 3-week series. As a part of our Decolonizing Our Faith, I'm purposely selecting repertoire for the service music that is composed by people who are typically silenced for some reason or another. The piece we just listened to was by an African-American female composer named Julia Perry. When we listen to these different pieces throughout the service, I'll put a link to a bio of those composers in your chat, and if you'd like to read those at that time, we can go on and do that. And now we're gonna move on with our service. Thank you. You're muted, Emily.
All right, here we go. Good morning and welcome to our All Souls morning service. My name is Emily Salinas, and today I have the privilege to serve as your worship associate. All Souls is an inclusive community in which we celebrate the inherent worth and dignity of each person. We are a community of open hearts and open minds, and here we invite you to bring your full self and all of your lived experiences to our community. Our congregation is comprised of people with varying faith beliefs, but we are united by our covenant and by our belief that diversity is much richer than uniformity. Here we strive to put love, our guiding principle, into action. Today we celebrate the opportunity to come together and worship, and we thank you for joining us here today. And so now let us join together in worship as we explore how we, as Unitarian Universalists, may learn to embody communalism and how this spirit or how this practice can enrich our spiritual practice, excuse me. And today we have Miss Annalise Kinsbo, who will be celebrating her 8th birthday on Tuesday, and she will be lighting our chalice. Please join me in reciting our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant.
Good morning, everyone. It's Reverend Anastassia Zinke here. I am so glad that you have joined us this morning. I wanted to take a minute and introduce our series. Our worship series is called Decolonizing Our Faith, but it is more than that. Today, we are also engaging in some consciousness raising. In academia, decolonization is a term usually used to refer to the process by which European empires collapsed in the decades following World War II. But the term extends well beyond the mid-20th century, for the colonial impulse to control the history of the world and the bodies and minds of its peoples persists. And so too does the desire for liberation. Decolonization, as we're talking about it, isn't just about a collection of political events that fall across a timeline. It extends to ridding each of our minds of a colonial mindset. Now, you may think that decolonization is primarily a process for those who were colonized, but that is a false dichotomy. The patterns and vestiges of colonialism remain strongly embedded in Western culture, capitalism, and globalization. So colonialism is therefore strongly embedded in our cultural practices, our mindset, and of course, as part of those, our houses of faith. As the Native leader said to me and hundreds of others who gathered in Standing Rock on a cold Friday morning on December 2nd, 2016, you need to decolonize your mind. No one had ever said that to me before. I didn't even know that was a thing. But today and for the next 3 Sundays, we are going to explore more about our relationship with colonization and colonialism, and we are going to consider what decolonizing might offer us individually and collectively. So let us start this work with a territorial acknowledgement. We gather together as a community who honors the interdependent web of life and the interdependence of being. We gather together as people who pledge to respect the dignity of all and who seek to move humbly upon our land. Friends, let us acknowledge that we walk upon the traditional territories of the Delaware, Miami, Potawatomi, and Shawnee tribal people, among others. Many of the descendants of the original nations of this land continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. We gather to hear their voices too often silenced in our culture. Let us make decisions as a community that honor and give respect to this heritage. You may notice that there's a piece of artwork being shown to you that you are familiar with. It's a famous artwork by Paul Gauguin, and it is titled, "Where Do We Come From? Who Are We? And Where Are We Going?" He painted it while on Tahiti, an island that he felt deeply connected with and where he fell in love and fathered children, and where he challenged his own sense of self. It's interesting that this is a painting of a colonized people and a people that still call to us evocatively through his painting with dignity and mystery. I'm going to invite you to sing our hymn, 1003, Where Do We Come From? But I also invite you to consider these questions that are so profound. Where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? You will see that Christina is going to sing this to us herself in a 4-part round. As you know the hymn and feel excited, I invite you to join her in one of her voice parts as we sing this hymn together.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery.
Lately, if you're like me, you found it difficult to turn a blind eye to the never-ending updates on our current COVID reality. Understandably so, the economic decline, the widespread illness, and the conflicting reports on ways that we should protect ourselves have provoked anxiety and confusion within our community. And recently, I find myself on social media much more than I'd like to admit, trying to keep up with new developments so that I can predict what might happen next, and generally just trying to make sense of this unprecedented actuality of our situation. And as you can imagine, in that regard, I really haven't had much success. Nonetheless, I will say that I found a silver lining in the news that comes across my feed. Beyond the publication of events, writers are now publishing ideas of new ways that we might move forward, ways that are more inclusive and mindful in regards to how we might work to imagine a more equitable society, a more equitable distribution of our resources. Most Americans, if they haven't already, are beginning to realize that the old normal did not work for the majority. Particularly over the past week, there were 2 articles that showed up in my feed that were shared by members of our All Souls family that I would like for you to read and reflect on as well. I posted these in our chat in case you would like to read them and think about them a little bit after our service. The first one, titled Get Ready for the Ultimate Gaslighting begins with the words, "You are not crazy, my friends." The author, Julio Vincent Gambuto, encourages us to be vigilant in the face of what he says is sure to come. He argues that our eyes have been opened, that we are seeing with our own eyes what can happen when the world simply stops. It's painful. There's an innate urge to return to normal, but we must also remember all of the good that we have seen come out of this situation. Americans do care, and this is evident in the actions that we have taken to care for one another. He argues that we must be vigilant and that a massive wave of gaslighting is soon to come in the form of a marketing strategy to make us think that we haven't seen what has been painfully displayed in front of our eyes. The failure of a government to protect its people, a cleansing of our planet in the absence of the day-to-day hustle and bustle, the injustice of a healthcare system tied to employment and without the basic resources necessary for healthcare workers to safely care for patients. And then the ways that these inequities disproportionately affect our most vulnerable populations. He argues that never in our history, have we had this opportunity to imagine and create the kind of society that we want for ourselves and future generations. The second reading I shared with you, along with a similar theme, is from an interview with the writer Rebecca Solnit, in which she argues that disasters pave the way for a new normal. She states, the status quo perpetuates itself by convincing us that change is inconceivable, impossible, and unnecessary, and how now we suddenly find ourselves in a situation where it does become conceivable, possible, and even necessary. She points out that disasters have the ability to do what activists are always trying to do, to point out the contradictions of who does benefit from the status quo. She warns that the winners of the old system are going to push hard to reassemble it, even after it has been shattered in front of us. There is a need for us to go forward, to refuse to go back. Now that our eyes have been opened to what is broken, we at least have a chance to build something new. Over the past few years, I found myself disillusioned at times, as I'm sure many of you have as well, wondering if what was possible for the wondering if it was even possible for the situation to worsen, and then eventually finding myself in a state of numbness at times, when I realized that for myself and for others, each new atrocity only dampened the effects of the prior, and in some ways creating a type of numbness that even prevented us from taking action. In our current state of affairs, I've come to believe that this has become a survival technique, one that we resort to when the world seems overwhelming. Similarly, the need for hope, the ability to find the silver lining, is also needed for our survival. Never has our seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we were a part, never has it been so evident. Humans are naturally social creatures. We want to care for our most vulnerable populations. Nonetheless, at times, our society can condition us to push these natural instincts aside, to focus on our own unique individualism. And within any community, there are imperfections that go unnoticed until tragedy occurs. Within these tragedies are opportunities for us to imagine something greater for our communities and in turn ourselves. And so as we focus today on the ways that we can create a communal mindset within Unitarian Universalism, I also invite you to think of ways that we can turn these ideas into action, both immediately within our community, as well as on a larger scale. Thank you.
Good morning, dear ones. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Cannon, and I am our Director of Children's and Community Programming at All Souls. And today I have a story to share with you. But first, I want to show you something. Let's take a look. Greg, can you advance our slide? So, yep, that's right. It's a fried egg. Raise your hand if you eat fried eggs. I see a few people who do. I also see some expressions that make me think that some of you don't, and that's fine. I personally like fried eggs. I like how they look like little suns, but that's not what I want to talk about today. This morning, I want to talk about how many ways there are to see an egg. Now, you may not be convinced of this, but let me give you an example. What if I take off the glasses that you always see me in, the ones that I'm wearing right now, and I put on these? Oh my, that looks quite different, doesn't it? I wonder what a purple egg tastes like. I've never had one before. You might have some ideas. Well, I'm going to put my regular glasses back on because you may not know this, but it is actually very difficult for me to see without them. So while this egg is purple, it's also very blurry. So I want to think about some other ways to see this egg because this is only the beginning. For example, if you have a pantry and a refrigerator full of food and fried eggs are not your favorite thing, then you might look at this fried egg and see this. But what if you are allergic to eggs and you check carefully to make sure they're not in any of your food at all? Then you might look at a fried egg and see this. And what if you haven't had breakfast yet this morning and you didn't have anything to eat all day yesterday either? Then you might look at a fried egg like this. But that's not all. What if your vision is impaired? If it is, you might be using a special computer program that reads something called alt text to you. Alt text explains what each picture on the screen shows so that you'll know. And it looks a little bit like this. That says image, a fried egg in a pan. Now, some people's computers may be reading this to them right now, but not all computer programs use alt text. And if they don't, then people who are vision impaired can't even find out about that fried egg picture at all. So when we can use alt text, we should. Now, let's move to our last slide. So this is a very important thing for us to think about in worship, in our faith formation classes, at the park, everywhere. We might look at an object, a food, a situation, and we might see one thing. But the person next to us might look at that same object or food or situation, and they might see it very differently. We can practice imagining all the different ways there are to see things, and this is very important, we can also listen carefully when someone tells us, I see that thing differently than you do. We can remember that information for next time. And we can also explain to our friends what we learned, and then they'll know too. That will help us be better friends, better classmates, and be better Unitarian Universalists. So let's all practice seeing things in many different ways together. Blessed be.
Today, I have a couple pastoral announcements to share with you. The first is, it is my great joy to share with you that we have a new baby in our community. It is the son of Liz and Jay Elsmore and the younger brother of Colin Elsmore, and it is Arthur Sloan Elsmore. Let's give a little silent applause and appreciation. You could write in chat your congratulations. Arthur was born on April 6th. He was 7 pounds and 10 ounces and 21 inches of lovable length. So please, if you would send your congratulations to Liz and Jay and Colin and Arthur. Bringing a life into this world is no easy thing, and loving is the most tender and demanding thing that we could do. They, if you would like to deliver a new meal to them, they welcome all food. And if you could just let the church office know so that way we could help with any coordination, that would be wonderful. I also wanted to lift up that Sherry Jordan is going through a time of searching and centering and some grieving as her mother gets weaker and sicker and is just not in the same state of health as she and her mother and we would all wish her mother to be. And she's going to be journeying to be with her mother for some time. So please let us send strength to Sherry, her mother, and her family. I now invite you to lift up in the silence of your hearts or to share with us in the chat function those people or causes that you are thinking about today. Thank you. So I have a theory about colonialism, and my theory is that those who embrace colonialism implicitly do not believe in a loving, liberatory, or merciful God. They believe that the most important person is the person with power. They believe that the most important time is now. And both of those cause them to forget their ancestors and lead them to fail to plan for their grandchildren's future. Because they do not believe in a loving, merciful, or liberatory God, they don't believe that prayers have a purpose. They don't believe that prayers for mercy or liberation will be answered. They don't believe that there's a higher cause or value or presence that will call them into accountability. And so to pray, to seek within yourself where a value lies beyond oneself, to pray for deliverance, to pray for more mercy, to recognize that there is value beyond yourself. All of these are reasons to pray that I think can help us shift out of a colonial mindset. Our reading, almost a prayer today, is entitled For 5,000 Years or More by Matthew Johnson. For 5,000 years or more than 15,000 generations, human beings have been invoking spiritual power. My predecessors and yours have gathered together to make sense of their lives and their place in the cosmos. And they have spoken aloud and invited what they conceived as sacred and powerful to be with them. They've called upon the spirits of air and earth, fire and water. They called upon the bear and the deer. They have asked for the raven to protect them. They pleaded for the heroes of old to slay the monsters of their fears. They sang songs they learned from their grandparents and moved in appointed ways or in ways that were new, but felt like the right thing to do. And they imputed power to these spirits and to the memories of those heroes. They called them gods, and they were invoked. Vishnu and Kali, Elohim, Odin, and millions of others. Every group of people everywhere, they gathered to make sense of their lives and to make sense of their place in the cosmos. And they called these spirits to be present to them. And so do we. So do we. We gather this morning to make sense of ourselves and the universe in which we live best as we are able. And we call ourselves to worship together, and we invoke the power and the wonder of life itself, that to which all the spirits of those animals and the memories of heroes exist. We invoke that power, which is, we know, always around, always with us, but which we sometimes forget about. We forget that we are a part of the whole creation. We forget that we are stardust. We forget that we are capable of miracles, first among them that we can love. We forget these things, so we invoke the power of existence, so that way we can remember, so we can lift our eyes and open our ears to the true and beautiful. For 5,000 years or more, we have done this. In many tongues, in many ways, we have done this. And so we continue that ancient tradition in our way and in our time. So let us now, first in silence and then through song, open ourselves to meaning familiar and new. Please enter into this time of silence with me. Our next hymn is in our teal hymnal, 1032, Da Una Neish. And I learned something just simply interesting and wonderful about this song. I've always appreciated it because of its beautiful language, both musical and spoken. But the story of this song actually starts right after 9/11. There was a Muslim woman who was living in New York City and who personally was grieving and traumatized by September 11th. And she had great fear for her family and the peoples in the Middle East, who she feared there would be war with. And so she put together this prayer of peace in Arabic, and she took it to one of her Jewish friends who was a musician, composer, and together they created this song, a song that prayed for peace, peace by gathering together people of different faiths. It's so aching to me that this song is so beautiful, and yet shortly thereafter, America waged what many considered, again, an act of colonialism as it went into the Middle East and established military bases and economic relationships that extracted some value of oil. and that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of native inhabitants of those countries. Let us sing this song as a prayer for peace. Let us sing it with a little bit of ache in our heart, and may that ache be a pledge that we will never urge our country to go to war like that again. Please, will you join me in singing? I think we'll end up singing, perhaps. Oh, go ahead, Greg.
We're going to sing that in a second, if you give me a minute.
Perfect. Thank you for that song. For more than 2 centuries, the imperial enterprise of the United States has colonized territories and resources of the original nations of this continent and other countries and continents around the world. We have often done this pretending that there was a provincially assigned or God-given destiny. Christendom was supposedly mandated to consume and eliminate heathendom. And do not think that we are separate from this history. Our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors actively participated in Western colonialism. This history, so often unspoken about within our faith, I think is also defining. Anything that we leave unexamined continues to shape us as individuals and as Unitarian Universalists. I shared earlier that on my first morning at Standing Rock, I, with hundreds of others, were told to decolonize our mind. Decolonize our minds. This phrase spoke a truth to me and evoked a curiosity about a way of living, but I also didn't really know how to hold that truth yet, much less live it. I hope and imagine that you too might be curious about decolonizing your thinking. But what does this mean? I wish that there was a really clear roadmap or even an image of what a truly decolonized society would look like. I don't think there is one yet. Yet, if we are free ourselves, we need to find moments or try to find teaching moments in our own lives or in the lives of others that might guide us to some practical steps. One moment that I could tell that it was true that I had this sort of colonial mindset was when I was working with Burmese refugees who were illegally living in Thailand. I got hired to teach them English. They were a remarkable set of women leaders who would journey back to Myanmar or Burma to document sexual violence that were perpetrated against their minority ethnic group as a tactic of war. And they would also document sex trafficking. And one of my students actually got to testify at the UN a few months after I left them, which was a tremendous moment of pride and solidarity for me. When I was there, there were 9 of us women living in a 2-bedroom house, and pretty much the curtains were drawn all the time. And we spent most of our time in kind of a dark basement-ish living room that was also our dining room and also where we would have our English classes. And I partially took this because I was passionate about what they were doing, but I also said, oh, 4 hours of teaching a day, I'll get to explore Thailand and this culture that I'm in and everything like that. And I remember it was maybe my 3rd day there, and one of my students said, "You're going out again?" And I said, yeah, I'm gonna go out. I'm just gonna go to the market and, you know, see what's there. And she goes, again? And I said, yeah, I'll be back soon. And what I came to realize from her question and from then paying more attention to how they were acting was that I had, as an American, this idea of a great privilege of the freedom of movement, a great privilege of freedom of fear about my status, legal status, but also freedom of fear about whether or not I belonged somewhere. As an American, I've been given a great sense that I belong and I have rights to freely move about. I realized that this was not true for my housemates. They were people who had been persecuted and targeted, both politically and physically. And they were there illegally as refugees. And the reason why they stayed in so much was not only their own trauma, was because they didn't want to draw attention to themselves. And I realized that my coming in and out of this house as an American in a highly residential neighborhood was also drawing attention. And that was a moment when I had to realize that if I was going to truly be in a mutual relationship with my students and a relationship of solidarity, that I needed to shift how I moved in this world. And so I too began to stay in. The other moment that was a real teaching moment for me was when I went to Standing Rock. So I went to Standing Rock as a chaplain during a highly public weekend for them. When I arrived for the first couple days, it was sunny and bright and a balmy 16-degree high, but it was often more about 0 degrees. Again, I was sleeping on a floor with, in this case, about a dozen other people. And I would go and, for about 12 hours a day, mostly walk around the camp, seeking to be of service. Now, generally, when I think about walking 12 hours across snow, in frigidly cold temperatures, this does not sound like a delight for me. Also during this time, we had news, and it was true, that a very significant blizzard was coming, a really, really bad blizzard. And I will tell you that after my 4 days there, I did not want to leave, come blizzard or not. I really wanted to stay, and I think that was really because of the power of a decolonized community. So I want to tell you a little bit about that community. It was a community in which people truly lived for one another. There was an ethic of mutual care and mutual responsibility. So I shared earlier that there was a blizzard coming, and one of the things that the leaders of the camp asked all of us to do again and again is to go through the camp and make sure that everyone had a weatherized structure. A lot of people had shown up with their own camping tents, and those were just not going to make it through. And they said, you know, a lot of people show up with this Western mindset, this colonial mindset of independence, self-reliance, toughness, and those things are very nice, and they will not last through this blizzard. And so we literally had to ensure that people were tenting up together, that no one was left alone, everyone had a plan. It's that kind of mutual care. Another mutual care came in through the meals. There was no money in the camp, no commerce whatsoever. There was not even a way to pay for anything if you wanted to. Donations all happened online if you wanted to make them separately. And so you would go through the camp, and you would find one of the sub-communities that was making meals, and they would ensure when I was there that all 9,000 people were fed somehow or another. And again, there was this sense of, we're just going to make sure that everyone makes it through every single meal, as well as through this blizzard. The other way that I could tell that they really lived for one another was how they did intergenerational community. The way that they did it was children were adored, delighted in, taught. The youth were the inspirational revolutionaries, and they had a voice that people listened to, a prophetic voice about the future that the tribe needed to safeguard. Adults were the formal leaders, the ones who structured meetings and made plans and helped direct decisions where need be. And the elders were those who provided wisdom, advice, storytelling, and most of all, blessing. There was not a single generation, therefore, that didn't have a role that I would say gave them leadership. I want us to think about what it would be like to live in communities that were that mutual, where care was that deeply extended. And I want us to think about a Unitarian universalism that has that level of care and mutuality. The good news for us, I think, is that though we have some aspects of a colonial mindset, we also have our history of covenanting. Now, our history of covenanting is very interesting and very relevant to this topic. When some of our religious ancestors, the Puritans, came over from Europe, they were a persecuted people under an imperial empire. It was their empire, but they were still persecuted and they still had fear. And they came and settled on these shores, and they were so clearly aware that this greater power could come and squash them at any time. And so they began a new way of living for one another. They began a proto-democracy here on our shores. They made decisions by vote, where it was true at that time that even amongst them that only men with land, white men with land could vote, but they still would gather together these voters, and that is how they made decisions together. But it wasn't just democracy, it was covenanting. And covenanting for them said, we are going to have deep discussions, ongoing discussions about how to live with one another. And sometimes they would let these discussions about how to live with one another continuously happen for about 2 years. And the two things that they really came out of this, you could see this if you look at the history of our Dedham, Massachusetts church, is they said there is one supreme truth, that there is a source of love in this world, and we are meant to embody that. And two, we are meant to behave in this mutual way towards one another and being covenant. And we know that we are doing this when someone in our community greatly frustrates us. We will be as forbearing as possible. And when we can forbear no longer, we will send 2 people to go to their home and to talk with them more, to bring them back into relationship. Now, this wasn't just touchy-feely. They were doing this in part because they wanted to make sure that they were so on the same page that there was basically no splashy news stories of trouble on these American shores that then would attract the attention of the Imperial Army. So they were doing it as a way, essentially, they had a kind of performance anxiety. They cared how people saw them, but they also did it as an act of resistance, an act of survival. They recognized, in short, that there was power in living for one another. It was a power that would let them stand up to the most powerful empire they knew. I invite you in these weeks ahead to think about your own stories, my dear ones. Stories in your life that called you to attention about some privilege that you have. Stories that speak to you about the power of when you belong, when you're cared for, when you participate in a group, participate in paying forward that care. Do we have a clear image yet of what a decolonized Unitarian Universalism might be? No, not fully. But by remembering our ancestors, by excavating through our life experiences, by sharing our stories, by honoring all those across the different generations, and most of all, by living in covenant and by an ethic of mutual care, I think we can move there, step by step. Blessed be, and amen.
In the spirit of this sermon, I would like to invite you to think about some specific ways that you can take action. In our chat, you will find a link that you can copy and paste into your browser. This will take you to our virtual connection card. You may also use this form to let us know how you are doing and ways that you would like to further connect with All Souls. Please take a moment at this time to fill out your connection card. At this time, you should also see a second link in our chat box. And if you copy and paste this into your browser, this will take you to our website where you can make a donation to All Souls, as well as to our Sharing the Plate recipient for this week, the Unitarian Universalist Partnership Council. So at this time, I invite you to again copy and paste the link in our chat to your browser and take a moment to make a contribution. Thank you so much.
Our benediction today is offered to you by the Council of 13 Indigenous grandmothers from around the world. As you move through these changing times, be easy on yourself and easy on one another. You are at the beginning of something new. You are learning a new way of being. You will find that you are working less in the yang modes that you were used to. You will stop working so hard at getting from point A to point B the way you have in the past, but instead will spend more time experiencing yourself in the whole and your place in it. Instead of traveling to a goal out there, you will voyage deeper into yourself. Your grandmother's grandmother knew how to do this. Your ancestors from long ago knew how to do this. They knew the power of the feminine principle. And because you carry their DNA in your body, this wisdom and this way of being is within you. Call upon it. Call it up. Invite your ancestors in as the yang-based habits and the decaying institutions on our planet begin to crumble. Look up. A breeze is stirring. Feel the sun on your wings. May it be so. I want to remind you that there's a variety of ways to connect with us this week. I invite you to find a way that might be best for you. We offer a series of programs, including one today, Path to Membership at noon. There is probably information on our website to join in or send me an email at ministerallsoulsindy.org, and you could find out more about our community. And then there are a variety of other programs, but also if you just want to send us a note saying, I would love a call or an email or just a check-in, we'll be sure to respond. Thank you for joining us today.
Everyone, our final hymn today is a new hymn to us. It's number 1013 in our books, Open My Heart. I really like it because I think it sort of encapsulates the ways in which we're opening ourselves up to these new experiences and this new way of looking at the world in these 3 weeks. So I invite you to live a little bit in the spirit of uncomfortability and learn a new song, and it'll be sung in a round by Christina. So enjoy this and sing along as you feel able to.